The CEO boss noticed her bruised wrist and slid his jacket over her arm. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The silence of the 40th floor was a living thing, a pressurized quiet that hummed with the latent energy of the city sleeping below. Isabella felt it in her bones, a constant thrum that matched the nervous pulse in her wrist. She typed, the rhythmic click of the keys a desperate mantra against the exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. The final slides for the quarterly review needed to be perfect, flawless, a testament to her competence that might, for a few hours, make her feel like more than just a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. Her sleeve, the cuff of her silk blouse, kept slipping. It was a small thing, a betrayal by a single button that would not stay fastened, but every time the fabric slid down her forearm, her breath would catch in her throat. The ugly, violet-tanned blue stain on her wrist felt like a beacon, a screaming announcement of her failure to keep the chaos of her life contained. She tugged the cuff down again, her fingers fumbling, her focus fracturing as the numbers on the screen blurred into meaningless squiggles. He moved with a stillness that was more commanding than any sound. Isabella did not hear Alessandro Gallo approach. She simply felt a shift in the atmosphere, the air growing heavier, charged with a presence that owned not just this office, but the entire building and everything the light from its windows touched. She froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, her gaze fixed on the monitor as if intense concentration could render her invisible. He was supposed to have left hours ago, a phantom of tailored suits and a low, resonant voice that never needed to be raised to be obeyed. Yet, he was here, standing somewhere behind her, and she could feel his scrutiny like a physical weight on her shoulders. She risked a glance at her wrist, relieved to see the cuff was, for the moment, in place. She forced herself to type a few more words, the pretense of work her only shield. When his shadow fell over her desk, she finally had to acknowledge him, turning her head slowly, a polite and subservient smile plastered on her face. Alessandro Gallo's eyes were the color of aged whiskey, and they missed nothing. He was not looking at her face, but at her hands, still poised over the keyboard. His expression was unreadable, a mask of aristocratic indifference that she had learned was more dangerous than any overt display of emotion. He said nothing, his silence stretching the moment into an eternity, and in that agonizing quiet, the traitorous cuff slipped one final time. It slid down past the delicate bones of her wrist, revealing the mottled, shameful discoloration in the stark, sterile light of the office. Isabella's heart plunged, a sickening drop into a cold pit of dread. She instinctively tried to pull her arm back, to tuck it away, but her movements were sluggish, clumsy with shame and fear. The air thickened, and she felt the primal urge to flee, to disappear, to simply cease to exist under that penetrating gaze. She braced for a question, for a look of pity or, worse, disgust. She expected a corporate platitude, a detached inquiry about whether she needed to speak with human resources. Instead, Alessandro moved. He shrugged out of his suit jacket, a single fluid motion of dark, expensive wool. The garment was an extension of his power, impeccably tailored, smelling faintly of cedar and something uniquely him, something clean and masculine and intimidating. He did not offer it to her, nor did he ask if she was cold. Without a word, he stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He leaned down, not to her level, but just enough to assert his dominance over her space, and gently, with a deliberateness that made her skin tingle, he draped the heavy jacket over her shoulders and arm. He adjusted it, his fingers brushing against her, his touch surprisingly careful as he ensured the sleeve of his jacket completely covered her own, hiding the bruise from sight. The weight of the fabric was a shock, a sudden, grounding pressure that was both a comfort and a cage. He had not spoken, had not asked, had simply acted, a quiet, decisive claim. When he was done, he straightened up, and his eyes finally met hers. The indifference was gone, replaced by something ancient and hard, a chilling intensity that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade and into the terrified heart of her. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and immediate, blurring the reflection of the city lights on the vast window behind him. She was not crying from pain or even from the humiliation of being seen, but from the staggering shock of his gesture. It was not pity. It was something else entirely, something possessive and fiercely protective that she had never experienced. It was an acknowledgement without words, a silent declaration that he saw her secret, and he would not permit it to be seen by anyone else. He had covered her shame with a piece of himself, and in that single, silent act, he had bound her to him in a way that no employment contract ever could. He held her gaze for a long moment, the world outside falling away until there was only the two of them in the silent, glass-walled tower, a predator and his discovery, the air crackling with unspoken promises and imminent danger. The ride down in the private elevator was a descent into a new kind of reality. Alessandro stood beside her, not touching, yet his presence was an overwhelming force in the small, mirrored space. The jacket was still around her shoulders, a heavy, warm mantle that felt both like armor and a brand. He had said only 2 words after their silent exchange. "You're done," his voice a low command that brooked no argument. He had then shut down her computer himself, his movements efficient and precise, before gesturing for her to precede him out of the office. Now, as the floors counted down in soft, illuminated numbers, Isabella stared at her reflection, at the small, pale woman swallowed by a powerful man's jacket, and wondered what she had just stumbled into. She could feel his gaze on her profile, analytical and unwavering, and she kept her own eyes fixed forward, her hands clutched in her lap, her knuckles white. She should have been terrified of him, of this overreach, this strange and silent intrusion into her life. But the fear was secondary to a profound, unsettling sense of relief that was so potent it made her feel dizzy. At the lobby, his driver, a man built like a mountain with a face of carved stone, was waiting by the gleaming black sedan. He held the door for Alessandro, his eyes respectfully averted, but as Isabella moved to go around to the other side, Alessandro stopped her with a quiet, "Here!" It was not a request. He guided her to the same door, his hand hovering near the small of her back without making contact, a gesture of direction that was as effective as a physical push. She slid onto the soft leather seats, the interior of the car smelling of wealth and control, the same scent that clung to his jacket. Alessandro followed, settling beside her, and the door closed with a solid, definitive thunk, sealing them inside the cocoon of tinted glass and silence. He gave her address to the driver without asking, his knowledge of her personal details another small, unnerving revelation. As the car pulled smoothly into the stream of late-night traffic, he finally spoke to her, his voice calm and level, yet carrying an undercurrent that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. "Tell me his name," he said. It was not a question, but a demand for a piece of information he considered his right to possess. Isabella's blood ran cold. The fragile bubble of relief burst, replaced by a sharp, icy spike of panic. To speak Richard's name aloud to this man felt like a death sentence. Richard, with his charming public face and the private rage that left marks on her skin and soul, was a monster she understood. Alessandro Gallo was an enigma, a man whose power was so vast and absolute that she could not begin to comprehend the consequences of inviting it into her life. She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. "It's nothing," she whispered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'm just clumsy. I tripped." The excuse was pathetic, an insult to both their intelligences, and she knew at the moment the words left her lips. She could feel his stare burning into her, a laser of disbelief and impatience. Alessandro did not challenge her lie. He simply let it hang in the air between them, its flimsiness a testament to her terror. He turned his head and looked out the window, at the blur of lesser lives and dimmer lights passing by. "In my world, Isabella," he said, his voice dropping lower, softer, yet somehow more menacing, "there are no accidents. There is only action and consequence. There is respect and there is disrespect. What was done to you is an act of disrespect not just to you, but to me, because you work for me. You are part of my business, my territory, and I do not tolerate such intrusions." He still was not looking at her, but she felt his words as if he had laid a hand on her. The corporate language was a thin veil over a much older, more brutal code. He was not talking as a chief executive officer. He was talking like a king whose authority had been challenged. The concept was so far beyond her understanding of the world, so primal and terrifying, that she could not formulate a response. She was a line item in his vast empire, and someone had dared to damage his property. When the car pulled up in front of her modest, nondescript apartment building, a place she had chosen specifically for its anonymity, the driver did not move to open the door. Alessandro turned to face her fully, the confines of the backseat making the encounter intensely intimate. "This is the last time I will ask you as a request," he said, his whiskey-colored eyes locking onto hers. "After this, I will find out on my own. And my methods for acquiring information are far less pleasant than a simple conversation. The man who did this to you, he will be dealt with. The only choice you have in the matter is whether you give me his name or whether I take it. Either way, the outcome for him will be the same." His promise was absolute, delivered with the chilling certainty of a man who had never been denied, who had never failed to impose his will upon the world. He was offering her a choice that was not a choice at all, a test of loyalty to a sovereign she had not known she served. The jacket around her shoulders felt heavier than ever, the price of his protection becoming terrifyingly clear. He was not offering to help her. He was offering to eliminate a problem, and in doing so, he would be claiming her as his own. The following day, the office was a minefield of unspoken tension. Isabella wore a long-sleeved, high-necked dress, a fortress of fabric designed to conceal, but she felt as if she were naked, every glance from a coworker a potential discovery. Alessandro's jacket was folded neatly in a bag under her desk, an object of immense weight and significance that she did not know what to do with. Returning it felt like a rejection of his silent offer, while keeping it felt like an acceptance. She had not given him Richard's name, had simply fled from the car with a muttered, panicked "thank you," her heart hammering against her ribs. She had spent a sleepless night replaying the encounter, the cold promise in his voice echoing in the darkness of her apartment. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he was already in motion. Men like Alessandro Gallo did not make idle threats. Their words were instruments of will shaping reality to their design. The air in the office crackled with an energy that seemed to emanate directly from his corner office, a low hum of power that made her skin prickle. He had not summoned her, had not even acknowledged her presence when he'd swept past her desk that morning, but his silence was more potent than any words. It was the quiet of a predator waiting for the precise moment to strike. Her phone buzzed late in the afternoon. It was Richard. A string of texts, first apologetic, then cajoling, then demanding to know where she was and why she was not answering. Her stomach twisted into a knot of familiar dread. His apologies were always the precursor to another cycle of tension and violence, his way of resetting the board for his next move. She ignored the messages, her fingers trembling as she tried to focus on a spreadsheet that now seemed utterly meaningless. An email pinged in her inbox. The sender was Alessandro Gallo. The subject line was blank. Her heart leaped into her throat as she clicked it open. There was no text, only an attachment, a single, high-resolution photograph. It was a candid shot of Richard, laughing with a group of friends outside a bar. He looked handsome, carefree, utterly oblivious. The second attachment was a detailed dossier. Richard's full name, his date of birth, his address, his place of work, his parents' names, his social security number, even his credit score. Everything. A complete and total violation of a man's life, compiled with chilling efficiency. Alessandro had not needed her to give him the name. He had taken it just as he had promised. The unspoken message was deafening. He knew. He had her entire life, her entire messy, terrifying secret laid bare on his desk. He was showing her the scope of his power, the ease with which he could uncover any truth he desired. This was not just about Richard anymore, it was about her. It was a demonstration of her own vulnerability, a reminder that she had nowhere to hide from him. A cold fear, different from the one Richard inspired, crept up her spine. This was the fear of the unknown, of a power so immense it could erase a man from existence with a single command. The office suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in. She needed to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of his knowledge. She grabbed her bag, the one containing his jacket, and walked on unsteady legs toward his office. His executive assistant, a woman with a perpetually serene expression, simply nodded as she approached, as if she had been expecting her. The heavy wooden doors to Alessandro's office swung open before she even reached them. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, looking down at the city he ruled. He did not turn as she entered, but she knew he was aware of her every step. The office was vast and minimalist, decorated in shades of charcoal and black, a space designed to intimidate. She stopped in the center of the room, feeling small and exposed. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned then, his movements slow and deliberate. His expression was a cool, unreadable mask, but his eyes burned with a possessive fire that made her shiver. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated deep in her chest. "I wanted you to see me." He gestured vaguely toward the window, a sweep of his hand that encompassed the entire sprawling metropolis. "I wanted you to understand that what happens in this city, what happens in this company, happens because I allow it, and what was happening to you I do not allow." He crossed the room, closing the distance between them until he was standing directly in front of her. He was so close she could feel the warmth of his body, could smell that intoxicating scent of cedar and power. He looked down at her, his gaze dropping to the bag in her hands. "You can give that back to me," he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle, "or you can accept what it represents." Her fingers tightened on the handles of the bag. To give it back was to pretend last night never happened, to return to the life she knew, to the monster she understood. To keep it, to accept his protection, was to step into his world, a world of shadows and violence and absolute loyalty, a world from which there would be no return. "What does it represent?" she forced herself to ask, her throat tight. Alessandro's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "It represents a choice," he said. "The end of your old life and the beginning of a new one. Under my protection, as mine." The word hung in the air between them, possessive, definitive, and terrifyingly seductive. He was offering her a gilded cage, a sanctuary built on the foundations of his dark empire, and as she looked into his unyielding eyes, she realized the most frightening thing of all was how desperately a part of her wanted to say yes. Choosing to stay felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability, a surrender to a gravitational pull she had been fighting since the moment he draped his jacket over her arm. Isabella left his office that evening not as an employee, but as something else, something undefined and precarious. She had not given him a verbal answer, but her silence, her inability to hand back the jacket, had been answer enough. The following days were a study in subtle, seismic shifts. At work, nothing changed on the surface. She still compiled reports, still answered emails, still sat in meetings. But beneath the veneer of corporate normality, everything was different. People looked at her differently. The casual condescension from senior managers evaporated, replaced by a wary, deferential respect. Her projects were suddenly fast-tracked, her opinions given a weight they had never possessed before. She was an extension of his will, a vessel for his unspoken authority, and the entire 40th floor seemed to understand this before she did. It was unnerving, this borrowed power, and it isolated her, wrapping her in a bubble of fearful reverence that was just as lonely as her previous invisibility. Her personal life was where the changes were most stark and terrifying. The texts and calls from Richard stopped. Not gradually, but abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped. One day, her phone was a source of constant, buzzing anxiety. The next, it was silent. She felt a profound, gut-wrenching relief, but it was immediately followed by a chilling dread. She did not know what Alessandro had done, what dealt with truly men in his world, and her imagination filled the void with monstrous possibilities. She tried to search for Richard online, for any news, any mention, but it was as if he had been meticulously scrubbed from the digital world. His social media profiles were gone. His name yielded no recent results. He had simply vanished. The efficiency of his erasure was more frightening than any physical threat. It was a demonstration of a power that operated outside the laws she understood, a power that could unmake a person, leaving not even a shadow behind. This was the protection Alessandro offered. Not a shield, but a sword that eliminated threats before they could even form. Alessandro himself kept his distance, a silent observer watching his new acquisition acclimate to her environment. He communicated with her through actions, not words. A new apartment lease appeared on her desk one morning, for a luxury high-rise with security that rivaled a fortress, the first 3 years paid in full. A new car, a sleek, black sedan identical to the one in his fleet, was delivered to the new building's private garage, registered in her name. There were no discussions, no consultations. These were not gifts, they were provisions, the necessary tools for her new life as a person of value, his person. Isabella understood the unspoken contract. Her safety, her comfort, her entire existence was now his responsibility, and in return, he owned her loyalty. He owned her. The thought should have terrified her, and it did, but it was a fear laced with a heady, dangerous sense of security she had never known. For the first time in years, she could walk down the street without looking over her shoulder. She could sleep through the night without the fear of a key turning in the lock. The price for this peace was her autonomy, a trade she found herself increasingly willing to make. Their first real conversation since that day in his office took place a week later. He summoned her not to his office, but to a private dining room in a restaurant so exclusive it had no sign, only a single, unmarked door. The room was opulent and hushed, overlooking the city from a dizzying height. Alessandro was waiting for her, a glass of dark red wine in his hand. He looked different here, away from the corporate trappings of Gallo Enterprises. He was more relaxed. Yet more dangerous, the CEO facade stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. "Sit, Isabella," he said, his voice a low command that she obeyed without thought, her body moving before her mind had a chance to process. He watched her for a long moment, his eyes intense, analytical, as if he were memorizing the details of her face. "Are you sleeping better?" he asked, the question so simple, so unexpectedly personal that it caught her off guard. She nodded, unable to find her voice. "Good," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "Fear is a poor bedfellow." He did not mention Richard. He did not allude to the sweeping changes he had orchestrated in her life. Instead, he asked her about her work, about her ambitions before she had been forced to simply survive. He drew out details of her life she had forgotten, dreams she had buried under layers of fear and compromise. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his focus absolute, making her feel as if she were the only person in the world. He was mapping her, learning the terrain of her mind, her soul. It was an interrogation disguised as a conversation, a strategic acquisition of data. Yet, it was also the first time anyone had looked at her and seen potential instead of a problem. He spoke of his own family, not the corporate board, but the other one, the one that operated in the shadows. He spoke of loyalty, of honor, of a code that valued strength and punished betrayal above all else. He was showing her the architecture of his world, laying out the rules of the game she was now a player in. "In my family," he said, his eyes locking with hers across the table, "we protect our own, at any cost. You are one of us now, whether you are ready to be or not." His words were a vow and a warning, a promise of sanctuary and a declaration of ownership from which she knew, with absolute certainty, there was no escape. The gilded cage grew more comfortable with each passing day, its bars becoming less like a prison and more like the boundaries of a well-defended territory. Isabella settled into the rhythm of her new life, a strange duality of corporate analyst by day and the protected possession of Alessandro Gallo by night. He never came to her new apartment, a silent acknowledgement, perhaps, that some spaces still needed to be hers alone, but his presence was a constant, invisible shield. Sometimes a car would follow her at a discreet distance. Other times, she would see a familiar, stone-faced man from his security detail observing a cafe from across the street. She was never alone, never unguarded. This constant surveillance should have felt suffocating, but after years of living with the unpredictable threat of Richard, it was a strange comfort. It was the predictable, ordered control of a king, a stark contrast to the chaotic, emotional tyranny of a lesser man. Her fear of Alessandro was different. It was a deep, instinctual respect for a power that could destroy her, but had chosen instead to protect her. Their dinners became a regular occurrence, clandestine meetings in the hushed, private rooms of the city's most exclusive establishments. These were the only times he allowed the mask of the formidable chief executive officer to slip, revealing glimpses of the man beneath. He was a creature of intense discipline and profound control, his empire built on a foundation of unshakable will. He spoke of his childhood, not in emotional terms, but as a series of lessons in power, loyalty, and survival. He was the heir to a dynasty that predated the glittering skyscrapers of the city, a bloodline of men who bent the world to their will. Isabella learned that his business, Gallo Enterprises, was merely the public face, the legitimate and impenetrable fortress that funded and shielded the family's true endeavors. He was a paradox, a man who navigated billion-dollar mergers with the same ruthless precision he applied to the brutal politics of the underworld. He never confessed to specific crimes, never gave her details that could be used against him, but he spoke of his world in a way that left nothing to the imagination. He was showing her the truth of who he was, testing her, waiting to see if she would flinch. Isabella found she did not. Instead, she was fascinated. She listened, absorbing the brutal logic of his code, the fierce loyalty that bound his family, the absolute certainty with which he moved through the world. She began to understand that for Alessandro, there was no distinction between good and evil, only order and chaos, strength and weakness. He was a force of nature, a storm that brought order by obliterating everything that stood in its path. And in the eye of that storm, he had created a pocket of perfect calm for her. It was during one of these dinners, as a late summer rain lashed against the windows of their private sanctuary, that the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. He had been unusually quiet that evening, his gaze heavy, a storm brewing in the depths of his whiskey-colored eyes. He watched her as she spoke, a strange intensity in his expression that made her skin tingle and her heart beat a little faster. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was electric, a jolt of pure energy that shot up her arm and straight to her core. It was the first time he had touched her with such deliberate, personal intent since the night in his office. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a slow, possessive caress that was both a comfort and a claim. "You are not afraid of me," he stated, his voice a low, rough murmur. It was not a question. "I am," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper, yet she did not pull her hand away. "But not in the way I was before. It is a different kind of fear." His eyes searched hers, demanding more. "Before," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength, "I was afraid of pain, of chaos, of not knowing what would happen next. With you, I am afraid of the power you have, of what it means to be protected by you. I am afraid of what I am becoming." His grip on her hand tightened, his knuckles pressing into hers. "And what are you becoming, Isabella?" he asked, his voice laced with a raw, hungry curiosity. She looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who had single-handedly rewritten her reality, who had erased her past and was now dictating her future. She saw the loneliness in his power, the immense weight of the crown he wore. He had surrounded himself with soldiers and servants, but he had no equals, no one who saw the man behind the myth. In that moment, she realized the nature of her place in his life. He had not just saved a damsel in distress. He had seen something in her, a resilience, a quiet strength that mirrored his own in some fundamental way. He was not just protecting her, he was cultivating her. "I am becoming yours," she admitted, the words tasting of surrender and terrifying freedom. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. A smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the smile of a king who had not just conquered a territory, but had won its heart. He brought her hand to his lips, his mouth warm and firm against her skin, sealing her confession with a silent, possessive kiss that was more binding than any vow. The kiss on her hand was a promise, and Alessandro Gallo was a man who honored his commitments, however dark their nature. The transition from protected asset to cherished partner was seamless and absolute. He began to draw her deeper into his world, not just the corporate sphere where she already excelled, but the shadowed echelons of his other family. He brought her to his ancestral home, a sprawling stone estate north of the city, a place of old-world power and whispered secrets. Here, the members of his inner circle, men with hard eyes and unwavering loyalty, saw her not just as their boss's woman, but as a new and integral part of their hierarchy. She was treated with a profound respect that was rooted in their devotion to him. She was the queen to his king, and her word, they understood, was an extension of his own. It was a dizzying ascent, and Isabella learned to navigate this world with the same quiet intelligence she applied to her corporate work. She watched, she listened, and she understood that her power came not from commanding these men, but from commanding the heart of the man they all served. Their intimacy grew in the hushed quiet of the estate, far from the watchful eyes of the city. Alessandro, who was all control and ruthless efficiency in his public life, was a different man behind closed doors. He was a possessive and demanding lover, his passion a raw, elemental force that both thrilled and terrified her. But his passion was tempered with a surprising tenderness, a deep-seated need to cherish and protect the one person who saw him not as a boss or a don, but as a man. He explored her body with the same focused intensity with which he studied a business rival, learning every secret, every vulnerability, and treating each one as a treasure to be guarded. He found the lingering shadows of Richard's abuse, the faint, silvery scars and the deeper, invisible wounds, and he waged a gentle, patient war against them. His touch was a healing balm, his desire a confirmation of her worth, his presence a fortress that no ghost from her past could ever breach. In his arms, Isabella discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a passion that matched his own, and a sense of belonging that finally silenced the lonely echoes of her past. One cool autumn evening, as they stood on a stone balcony overlooking the estate's vast, darkening grounds, he turned to her, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. He held a velvet box in his hand. He did not kneel. Such a gesture would be beneath a man like him. Instead, he simply opened the box, revealing a diamond that seemed to trap the last light of the setting sun, a stone of breathtaking size and flawless clarity. It was not a conventional engagement ring. It was a statement, a symbol of wealth and power, a brand. "This is not a request, Isabella," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. "It is a statement of fact. You are my wife. You have been since the night I put my jacket on your arm. This is merely the formality, the public announcement of a truth that has existed between us for months." He took her hand and slid the heavy, cool ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. "My world is a dangerous one," he continued, his gaze holding hers. "There will be threats, there will be enemies, but they will never touch you. You are the heart of my empire, and I will burn the world to the ground before I let anyone harm you." His words were not the flowery promises of a typical romance. They were the brutal, unshakable oath of a king to his queen. Isabella looked from the magnificent, cold diamond on her finger to the fierce, unwavering love in his eyes. She had traded her freedom for a gilded cage, and in doing so, she had found a truer freedom than she had ever known. She was not his prisoner. She was his partner, the calm center of his violent world, the only person he trusted with his rare moments of vulnerability. She had not chosen this life, but this life had chosen her, and she would not have it any other way. She raised her hand, the diamond flashing in the twilight, and laid it against his chest, over the steady, powerful beat of his heart. "I know," she whispered, her voice filled with a certainty that matched his own. Her answer was not just an acceptance of his proposal, but an acceptance of all that he was, the darkness and the light, the chief executive officer and the mafia boss. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that was not about passion or desire, but about sealing a pact, a final, irrevocable surrender to a love that was as dangerous and as beautiful as the man who offered it. The city lights began to glow in the far distance, a kingdom laid at their feet, and for the first time, Isabella felt not like a captive, but like a ruler. 5 years. The passage of time was marked not in days or seasons, but in the deepening sense of peace that had settled into Isabella's bones. The 40th floor was still a place of immense power, the quiet still a living thing, but it was no longer the pressurized silence of a hunted creature. It was the calm, commanding silence of a queen surveying her domain. She stood before the vast expanse of glass. The city lights a familiar tapestry of conquered territory laid out before her. She was not working, not finishing a report under the duress of a looming deadline. She was waiting. Her reflection in the window was a woman she had once only dreamed of being, confident, serene, draped in a gown of dark silk that clung to her figure, her hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her throat. On her left hand, the gallo diamond captured the ambient light, not as a brand of ownership, but as a seal of partnership, a star of impossible brightness that mirrored the one in her soul. The memory of the bruised, frightened girl who once occupied this space felt like a story read in a book, a lifetime ago. The doors to the office opened with a soft, pneumatic hiss, and Isabella turned, a slow, genuine smile gracing her lips. Alessandro Gallo stepped inside, shrugging off his overcoat and handing it to the guard who had accompanied him, a silent, hulking figure who nodded once to Isabella before retreating and sealing them inside their sanctuary. Alessandro looked tired, the lines around his eyes a little deeper than they had been that morning, but his gaze sharpened with focus and a possessive warmth the moment it landed on her. He had come not from a late-night merger meeting, but from the other side of his world, the one of shadows and steel where disputes were settled not with contracts, but with consequences. She could see it in the tension in his shoulders, in the lethal stillness that had not yet fully receded. He crossed the room, his movements still imbued with that same predatory grace, but it was a grace that no longer intimidated her. It was as familiar and as welcome as his heartbeat. He did not speak, simply came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist as he pulled her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth seeping into her, a grounding force against the chill of the glass. They stood together in silence for a long moment, watching the river of headlights flowing through the city's arteries below. "It is done," he said finally, his voice a low rumble against her ear, the words holding a finality that spoke of bloodshed and the grim enforcement of his will. A rival family had overstepped, a foolish challenge to his authority that had required a swift and brutal response. Years ago, the vagueness of such a statement would have filled her with a cold, uncertain dread. Now, she understood its meaning completely. She felt a flicker of grim satisfaction, not for the violence itself, but for the restoration of order, for the protection of their world, their family. She reached up and placed her hand over his, her fingers lacing with his, the cool, hard facets of her ring pressing against his skin. "Was it costly?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Her question was not an accusation, but a strategic inquiry. She was his most trusted advisor, the only person privy to both halves of his empire. "Every necessary action has a cost," he murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. "But allowing disrespect to fester costs more. They will not make the same mistake again." He turned her in his arms then, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. His whiskey-colored eyes, which had held the chilling emptiness of a killer moments before, were now filled with a deep, consuming adoration that was reserved for her alone. "This is the part of my life I wish I could spare you from," he said, the admission a rare crack in his armor of absolute control. Isabella shook her head, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady rhythm of his heart beneath her palm. "You cannot spare me from what I am a part of, Alessandro," she told him, her gaze unwavering. "Your world is my world. Your battles are my battles. Do not mistake my peace for fragility. You forged this queen yourself. You cannot be surprised that she has a spine of steel." A slow, tired smile touched his lips, a look of profound pride that made her heart ache with love for this complex, dangerous man. He had not wanted a fragile doll to hide away in a castle. He had wanted an equal, a partner who could stand beside him at the center of the storm, and that is exactly what she had become. He had once told her that he did not tolerate intrusions into his territory. In the years that followed, she had come to understand the full, terrifying scope of that statement. His protection was absolute, a fortress built of wealth, influence, and fear. After Richard's silent, complete erasure from the world, no threat, no matter how small, was ever allowed to touch her life again. But his protection was no longer a unilateral act bestowed upon a helpless victim. It had become a shared responsibility. She protected him in turn, managing the intricate social and political chessboard of their public life with a deftness that even he admired. She was the velvet glove on his iron fist, the voice of reason that tempered his most brutal instincts, the only person who could command him with a soft word or a gentle touch. She anchored him. Before her, he had been an engine of pure, relentless will, a king ruling a lonely, sterile kingdom. She had given that kingdom a heart. She had given him a home, transforming the cold stone of the Gallo estate into a place of warmth and life, a sanctuary where he could lay down the heavy crown he wore and simply be a man. He often found himself thinking of that first night, of the bruised and terrified woman working in the silent office. He had seen her fear, but beneath it, he had recognized a flicker of defiant strength, a resilience that called to the most primal, possessive instincts within him. He had covered her bruised wrist with his jacket not out of pity, but out of an immediate, inexplicable recognition. She was his. Something essential to his own soul had been damaged, and his reaction was as swift and instinctual as defending his own life. He had intended to possess her, to keep her as a beautiful, treasured object he had saved. He had never anticipated that she would, in turn, save him. She had taught him a different kind of strength, a quiet power that did not need to be enforced with violence. She had shown him a loyalty born not of fear, but of love, a devotion so absolute it humbled him. He had spent his life surrounded by men who followed his orders, but Isabella was the only person who truly followed him, who saw the path he walked and chose, every single day, to walk it beside him. His gaze dropped to her wrist, and he lifted her hand, turning it over in his. The skin was flawless, smooth and pale in the dim light of the office. The ghost of a bruise was long gone, replaced by the delicate gold chain of a bracelet he had given her, a string of small, perfect diamonds. He traced the spot with his thumb, the memory still sharp, a reminder of the life he had pulled her from and the life they had built together. "I almost lost my composure that night," he confessed, his voice a rough whisper. "When I saw what he had done to you, I wanted to destroy him with my bare hands. It took every ounce of my control to simply take you home." Isabella's eyes softened. "You did more than take me home, Alessandro," she said. "You gave me one." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "You gave me a life." This was their truth, the foundation upon which their entire world was built. He had been her savior, but she had been his redemption. Their love was not a simple romance. It was a grand, sweeping epic forged in darkness and tempered by a fierce, unyielding devotion. It was a story of a king who had conquered the world, but had found his true empire in the heart of one woman. Later that night, they left the cold, glass and steel tower of their public power and returned to the sprawling stone heart of their private life. The Gallo estate was quiet, the grounds patrolled by silent, loyal men, the ancient walls a bulwark against the chaos of the outside world. They walked hand in hand through the grand, hushed hallways, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble floors. They paused before a heavy, carved wooden door, pushing it open to reveal a room bathed in the soft glow of a single nightlight. In the center of the room, in a small bed, their son was sleeping. Marco Gallo, a beautiful, perfect combination of the two of them, with his father's dark, serious eyes and his mother's gentle mouth. He was 3 years old, the heir to their vast, complicated legacy and the undeniable beating heart of their world. Alessandro's entire demeanor softened as he looked at the boy, the hard edges of the mafia boss melting away to reveal the father. He moved to the bedside, his large, powerful hand gently stroking the soft, dark hair from his son's forehead. Isabella came to stand beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder as they watched their child sleep. This was the ultimate symbol of their union, the future of the Gallo family. Everything Alessandro did, every brutal decision he made in the shadows, every ruthless negotiation he conducted in the light, it was all for this. To protect this boy, to ensure the world he inherited was one in which he was safe, powerful, and respected. It was the same fierce, protective instinct that had driven him to shield her wrist 5 years ago, magnified 1,000-fold. "He is so much like you," Isabella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Alessandro's arm tightened around her, pulling her even closer. "He has your strength," he replied, his voice a low, reverent murmur. "He will be a better man than I am." Isabella turned her head, pressing a soft kiss to his shoulder. "He will be a great man," she corrected him gently, "because he will be a king with a heart, just like his father." He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers in the dim light, and in their depths she saw a love so profound it stole her breath. He lowered his head and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the quiet certainty of years spent together, of battles won, of a love that had not only survived in their dangerous world, but had become the most powerful force within it. As they stood together in the quiet of the night, two sovereigns in their fortress, their reign was absolute, their peace was earned. And their love was the one thing in their world that was truly and completely untouchable.